Welcome back to the Fantasy Formula, and all roads lead to Abu Dhabi for an unforgettable championship showdown.
Oh, we have such a great weekend of F1 and F1 Fantasy coming up. Who will take the crown? And hey, who will be the best two times option heading into Abu Dhabi? As there's so many decisions to make.
The 2025 finale starts now. So, Zach, it all comes down to this. We have three drivers in the title fight. Lando Norris has 408 championship points. Max Verstappen, 12 points behind him at 396. And Oscar Piastri, 4 points behind him at 392. Now, the easiest path for these drivers is if Norris finishes ahead of Verstappen and Piastri, he wins the title. For Max, if he wins and Norris finishes fourth or lower, he'll win the title. And Piastri, he needs a lot to happen. He has to finish in the top two with Norris and Verstappen much lower. And then, of course, if two drivers are tied for the championship, it goes into countbacks. All three drivers have 7 wins, so it goes to second place finishes, and that's where Lando breaks the tie with 8 P2 finishes. So it's going to be a very tight weekend. Who stands out to you as we look ahead into the final weekend of the year?
So I actually can break it down quite nicely in a sense of you've got the high risk, medium risk, low risk option. I'll start off with the high risk one, and I do think that is Max Verstappen, purely because high risk, high reward. He is that driver this weekend because there is a high chance that he goes all out and gets first place. I still think even if Verstappen doesn't win the championship, but he wins in Abu Dhabi, there's not a lot of people like Norris at the minute. I still think he has a chance for driver of the day when that happens. So you've got potential of Verstappen, driver of the day, fastest lap, race win, even a potential championship. But I think because he knows how much is on the line, I also do think Verstappen is the most high risk for a crash. So that's why I say high risk, high reward, because he could, I think, definitely get the most amount of points. But he's also the most likely out of the three to get a DNF. Then you've got the medium risk, which I think is Oscar Piastri. Similar situation to Max Verstappen, he still needs to win it, but it's just so much less in his advantage that I do think Piastri is not going to be dive bombing it or doing anything too silly like Verstappen could be doing, but he's also going to be gunning for it in a sense of he'll still definitely be on the podium. And then you have the low risk option of Lando Norris, who I could easily see. Even though I don't think he will do this, it's a much higher possibility that he sits back and makes sure that he just doesn't crash. Like we sort of saw in Qatar. If he's second or first and coming into turn one, he's got Verstappen or Piastri diving it down the inside, I think he gives up the position because he doesn't want to do anything silly. So for me, that's how all three of them run there. And it gives a good little rundown on how you'd really want to set up your team heading into Abu Dhabi.
For me, just starting at the top, the most important thing, I'd like to run 2 of these drivers no matter what it takes. I've already got Lando and Oscar on my team from Qatar, but if you have a lower budget, I recommend selling off a second Tier A constructor, get into a Tier B asset that's a little bit cheaper, and then use the rest of that budget to get into at least 2 of these title contenders. And Zach, I think you nailed the risk profile of these 3 drivers because Lando was the lowest risk driver heading into Qatar, but because he played it conservatively and McLaren did their best Ferrari impression with their strategy, he scored the fewest points. And that really shuffled up the global league rankings, especially for those teams like myself that were playing the extra DRS boost. So getting this top driver right in the championship battle is going to be so important. For me, I think driver of the day will go to whoever wins the title, but it sounds like we're on different pages there. Do you see a path where Verstappen could get driver of the day despite not winning the title?
I really do think it's one of those things where if Verstappen wins and Norris just comes third and it's not, let's say Norris is within like 10 seconds of Verstappen and it was actually a good battle from first, second and third, I could see Norris winning the driver of the day. However, if Verstappen goes and runs away with it and Norris just pips him to the title, just from what I've seen from recent races and from the polls, like even for Verstappen to get driver of the day over Sainz in Qatar was quite monumentous. I think just Verstappen has that push that a lot of people watching F1, even people not playing F1 fantasy, just voting for driver of the day would just edge towards Verstappen for me.
Now, on that same note, Zach, one thing to consider are the betting lines entering this week because Vegas looks a little bit conflicted because there are lines for who's going to win the title and who's most likely to win the Grand Prix on Sunday. They show Lando at minus 300 and the overwhelming favorite to win the championship, but Max enters the week as the best odds to win the Grand Prix. So that tells me something very similar to what you just said. They expect Verstappen to run away with it at turn one. Lando won't put up a big fight, but he'll do just enough to finish on the podium and lock up the title. So as we think about who's going to score the most points in the context of F1 fantasy, I think Verstappen has the highest ceiling and the most likely odds of winning the race. If Norris finishes P3 with driver of the day, does that get him close? I think Max might have the odds going into this race of being the best driver. So I'm thinking about making a switch from Norris to Verstappen as the week starts.
Yeah, it's such a weird position because well, definitely it still looks like Norris Verstappen is the way to go for your driver pairing. Where do you 2 times from that? I think we'll get a better glimpse of that in the practice sessions. But it does then go to Piastri is sort of the differential out of those three now. I do think Piastri is more of a if you don't have the budget to go Norris Verstappen. However, I say that I still don't think it's going to be a bad option. We saw last year here, Piastri wasn't terrible. It was just him and Verstappen crashing. So if anything like that happens again, it won't be ideal, but we know Piastri does have pace here, so I'm not worried about him being a differential as well.
Now, I learned something interesting last night because in this final race of the season, you're going to want every moment on track to learn about the car and get yourself situated for the Grand Prix on Sunday. But Oscar Piastri is going to miss FP1 because McLaren still haven't run their final FP1 rookie session. This is something the drivers determined at the beginning of the year, and Oscar chose that last race to sit out. And hopefully it doesn't cost him because that's one less session where we're going to get some of that qualifying and race pace simulation data. So all eyes are going to be on him for FP2.
That really doesn't seem very smart from Piastri, but we'll see what they can do.
Now, before we move on, make sure you like and subscribe. We've had a fantastic season, and I want to end the year on a high note. So if you're hearing me right now, make sure you hit that like button. So as we look for clues about who's best to run this week, let's look at the driver's history at Yas Marina. So we all know Max Verstappen is mighty here. He has 4 straight wins from pole position entering last season. In 2024, he didn't finish on the podium, but at that point, he had already locked up the title, so I'm not sure he really had enough to race for. Otherwise, his record here is sensational. And then last year, it was Lando Norris picking up that mantle from Verstappen, taking pole, led every lap, took the victory. So Norris has also got some strong form around here. And Zach, you mentioned a moment ago, Piastri has 2 top 3 starts, but no top 3 finishes at this circuit. He's finished P6 and P10, and that P10 finish was a bit of a mess, making contact with Verstappen. Later on in the race, he made contact with Franco Colapinto. He took a 10-second time penalty. So just getting back to P10 seems like a triumph for Oscar. Hopefully, that same fate doesn't befall him again this weekend.
And then one other thing to keep an eye on, especially with these 3 drivers, it's a low chance of it actually happening, but just keep in mind if anything bad does happen in qualifying, because we have seen in the races, we've seen in qualifying last year when Leclerc did really bad, Piastri spun out and was able to recover, Verstappen spun out and was able to recover, that you can overtake around this track. So keep an eye on that, because that will affect on who we want to take as a 2 times or who actually looks better, because it might actually look better if someone like a Piastri ends up P10, even if Norris was to go on to win, or Verstappen. Just keep an eye on that, because they could end up getting more points than someone like a Norris or Verstappen, even if they were both in the top 3.
Yeah, those overtaken positions game points could be very big for Oscar. A few B-tier drivers with some big success here. Carlos Sainz has 2 podiums at Abu Dhabi, albeit it was with Ferrari, but he's having a sensational season with Williams. He's already got 2 podiums this season. Williams has locked up P5 in the constructor, so it is a big turnaround for that outfit. And he called his P3 finish in Qatar, quote, on pure merit. So Sainz is as confident as he's been all season. And then for Fernando Alonso, he looked sharp in Qatar, and he's coming off of 2 straight Q3 appearances and points finishes at Abu Dhabi, so he tends to finish the season on a strong note. And then Pierre Gasly, he finished P7 here last season, and if you can believe it, he has 10 Q3 appearances this season in the slowest car on the grid, so he's definitely outperforming the car.
And then just remember, everyone, heading into the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, we have the final race weekend of the Alpine Desert Dash. Now, this mini league actually is very, very cool. There are 3 great prizes on offer. First place, you get to have a virtual meet-up with either of the Alpine drivers. And you can also get a signed hat in second. And then also in third, you can still get a polo and a cap bundle. So I really do think that F1 Fantasy, like I've said all season long, have really stepped up their game for these mini leagues and the type of rewards we get for doing well in them. So make sure to join it if you want a chance to get any of these brilliant prizes down below. And then one of the big topics that will be coming up a lot this week is what chips to use in Abu Dhabi. And well, fun fact, it's basically if you've got one more chip, you just use it. It's time to use it now, no matter what it is, whether it be a wildcard, autopilot, no negative, extra DRS, limitless. However, I will say, if you have 2 or more chips and you've gotten into this situation where either you've just forgotten about one or you've ended up like maybe with a final fix and a limitless still left because you just never figured out when to use a final fix, I would say it still looks like all the time, if you have extra DRS, that goes above everything else. You'd want to use that first. Then you have the likes of limitless and no negative, who are the next best ones to use. Then I would say autopilot, then probably final fix, then wildcard. That would be my list for right now.
All right, let's break it down for one final tier list of the season. You can see McLaren are back in the buy category after a brief visit to the fence. Qatar was their highest fantasy score since Monza, and they're the only team locked in with 2 top 5 finishers entering this one. So obviously love McLaren entering this weekend. For Oscar Piastri, he's, like we mentioned earlier, maybe the least certain of the title contenders, but so many teams need that punt. He was sensational in Qatar, and this is his highest fantasy score since all the way back in Miami. So let's see if he can finish this season on a high note. One move that might surprise some people is George Russell to the fence. This has nothing to do with his form or how we think he'll do this week, but if you're running 2A drivers, I'm desperate to try to get 2 of the 3 title contenders because I think they're going to score the most points. But kudos to George. He's got a chance this week to become the 5th driver in F1 history to complete every racing lap in a season. So no harm on you if you take him on your team this week.
Yeah, and it's a sad sight, but I think the only team that we can really push away from is Ferrari. They're too expensive at this point. They've really dropped off a cliff. And I would even say now, which is such a crazy thought to have had at the start of the season, that Williams is a better A-tier constructor option. Just they're cheaper, and right now they're getting more points than Ferrari. So it's a sad sight, but definitely steer clear of Ferrari. Like Adam said, you need to have 2 of the 3 championship contenders realistically in a normal team, and then Russell would be the differential. And then you head over to the budget options, and I want to actually start with the sell options because the sell category for me this weekend is slightly different. B-tier constructor wise, I don't think it's going to be a B-tier constructor, so even the likes of Racing Bulls and Haas in the buy, I think that's only if you're running out of a bit of money. But every asset this weekend, it does not matter anymore. Yes, they might look bad on budget decreases or increases. It doesn't matter if you get that extra 0.6 million now. You're not going to get it heading into 2026. However, the reason they're in the sell is because we can still keep up with their form. Bortoletto's form hasn't been brilliant. Hulkenberg's had a DNF. Stroll, I mean, he's sort of just been doing what Stroll normally does. And Albon has been being outscored by Carlos Sainz by quite a bit recently. So that is why they're still in that low sell category. And you've got on the fence just by himself Liam Lawson. Again, purely because without the bad luck for Hadjar at the right end of the Qatar Grand Prix, he would have been a better option. And I still think heading into Abu Dhabi, Hadjar out of the Racing Bulls is the better option. And then you have people like Sainz. I think he's a dead lock on for everyone out there. He's been in brilliant form. You have Alonso and both Alpine still looking like cheap assets who, especially Alpine-wise, can start right at the back, and you just hope that they don't get muddled up with all of these issues like Colapinto did. He actually had a pretty decent weekend in Qatar just because he stayed at the back and didn't get involved with anything. And then finally, we've also got the double Haas outcome, which I'm a little bit worried about just because of how bad Qatar was, but maybe they will be able to bounce back after all of those issues. And then the 2 big ones of Antonelli and Tsunoda. I think Antonelli coming into this race weekend still is the best B-tier option. Obviously, he's still at that awkward price range. So it really is if you want that differential and you can't afford to have Norris Verstappen and you're going for someone else. And then Yuki, a little bit different. We'll see what he can do, but I'm not too confident on him exactly just for now.
I want to lean into those last 2 you mentioned, Zach, because Antonelli has been sensational lately. And if we just had one more week of the season, he'd likely cross the 15.5 million threshold to get back into Tier A. His second half of the season has been really phenomenal. Now, I want to give you a little bit of hope on Yuki Tsunoda because as we were recording this, news is starting to leak out from Red Bull is that Yuki Tsunoda won't be on the grid next year. And if a driver was to steal driver of the day from one of the three title contenders, it could be someone exiting the grid that has a really good weekend. And remember, Yuki's driver of the day at this race 2 years ago decided the whole global league. So if you want to have a really deep punt, maybe Tsunoda is crazy enough to work this week. Before we get to our lineups, it's not too late to become a member of the FanAm channel. Now, even though the F1 season is ending, our team at FanAm is planning some great content over the break. And that includes interviews with Gunther Steiner and F1 Academy champion Dorian Pon. Plus, you'll get exclusive access to all of our guides to start the 2026 season, so make sure you join today.
So now heading into our team selections for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, we've got a nice little team up and running for you where I think for everyone out there, this is the sort of team where, let's say you're just holding on for whatever rank you're at. Let's say you're just inside the top 1,000 and you just want to keep it. This is probably the way I would go with this sort of budget. And it's got Norris, Piastri, McLaren, that triple McLaren assets. Still a scary thought to have because, again, it still has never worked out. Even Qatar, I wouldn't say 100% worked out because it should have done better than it did. Paired up with the likes of Sainz, Gasly, Alonso. Sainz, like I mentioned, I think he's a deadlock for most teams out there. He looks like that B-tier driver that's just been on form recently. It was Behrman a few race weekends ago. Now it's Sainz. With Mercedes, again, I don't think Tsunoda's shown anything enough to switch Mercedes over to Red Bull, and McLaren is still an easy, consistent lock. I would say the only bubble maybe would be for something like this, maybe Norris to a Verstappen, depending on what the practice sessions say. However, this is very much the bog standard team we're going to be seeing from people, especially those who want to stay at the rank they're at right now.
Yeah, I definitely recommend this for teams that are winning their mini league. They just want to have a nice, safe option for the final race and take it all home. It's called everything to lose because I suspect Norris is going to play it safe, which gives him a really high floor, but also might cap his ceiling. So you might not be able to make a huge gain if you're chasing, but if you're trying to protect the lead, this team's as safe as it gets. Now, the opposite of that is this lineup here, which is nothing to lose. These are drivers that are going to go all out and have the highest risk, but also the highest potential reward for your teams. It's Verstappen and Piastri, the combination that would have dominated had you played them in Qatar last week. Yuki Tsunoda in what could be his final Formula One race in the near future. Sainz, who's been fantastic lately. And then for constructors, Red Bull and Mercedes. Now, this is assuming something happens to either Norris or Piastri that brings the McLaren constructor down into the clutches of Red Bull. Maybe Red Bull gets fastest lap, or they also get some of that fastest pit stop that they've been so good at over these last few races. So this team starts at $140.3 million, so it's a little bit more expensive, but you can see the bubbles here. If you bring in Lando Norris and Fernando Alonso for Piastri and Tsunoda, then you have the two title contenders in Verstappen and Norris, and this team costs the same $138.8 million as the team we showed you just a moment ago.
So now for all of you out there that don't have those high budgets, or maybe you just started the season a little bit later and you're still playing catch up to the rest of us, I would start with a similar team like this. It's $119.8 million for the bog standard foundation of it, which is Verstappen, Hadjar, Sainz, Lawson, Alonso, which I think is potentially the best upscale 2x option with Verstappen and the best for B-tier drivers out there right now, in my opinion, with McLaren and Mercedes. I think there's only so much you'd want to risk. Bog standard still being McLaren and Mercedes works out. However, like I mentioned, again, with a team like this, you'd probably look at the practice sessions. If Norris is on top, you'd probably give Norris that 2x instead and go over to that. If you needed a little bit more budget, you could also drop Mercedes down to a Racing Bulls, and then you could work your magic there. If you've got potentially a massive differential, but you want to go a little bit off the McLaren route, again, heading maybe into a McLaren making a mistake, then that's when you could also go from McLaren to Williams and have Williams and Mercedes instead. So there's a lot of workarounds you can do with this team. But the main gist of it is, again, low cost cap, trying to keep up with those high budget teams.
I love this team because you have the driver with the best record at this circuit, with the best odds to win entering the race, and with nothing to lose. So if you have to have one of the championship contenders, I think Max definitely stands out. Like Zach said, watch those free practice sessions, and hopefully we can see enough movement to know for sure who's the best 2X option.
So this team out there is probably the most audacious one of the lot, and I like referring to it as a little bit of a Crashgate 25 team. This is my team for I know a lot of people out there will want a differential of where the championship title contenders collide. And I'm talking about Norris and Verstappen, because I do think if that was a collision to happen, it would probably be between those two. If this was the case, and you think that could happen, which it is understandable, it could potentially happen, then I would go with a massive team like this. George Russell 2 times. Again, he's always in the wings waiting for something dramatic to happen. With this team, you'd be hoping for that as well. Normally, I would never recommend George Russell 2 times, but again, it's risk it for a chocolate biscuit time, see what happens. With Piastri, you've got to hope that he's just not involved with this, or he just has less pace than those two. Again, with Sainz, best B-tier driver in my opinion. Kimi Antonelli, who's looked really good in that Mercedes right now. Again, I don't think a lot of teams will have him, so he's another differential. With Fernando Alonso, bit of a buffer B-tier driver. He looks good, but he's just cheap. With McLaren and Mercedes. Again, if you can afford this, because it is 143.8 million, it's a big, big budget team, then all you'd have to do is either drop Mercedes down to a Williams if you still wanted to go a little bit safe on the McLaren asset, or you could even go the opposite and go McLaren over to Williams and have Williams and Mercedes, and then a lot of people could run this team.
We have some friends that saved up their budget all through the first half just to dominate in some of these mini leagues in the second half. So 143 million isn't crazy at all. We're back for one more deadline stream this Saturday at 8 a.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. GMT. Come hang out and help us send off the 2025 season.
Let's end this season with a bang.
Oh, I like that. That was short and sweet.